All right, guys, let's get into pedigrees. Now, a pedigree is a chart that shows the inheritance of a trait over several generations. So, a pedigree is commonly created for families and it outlines the inheritance patterns of genetic disorders and traits. So, a pedigree can help determine the probability that offspring will inherit a genetic disorder. So, how to read a pedigree? Now, first, females are going to be circles and males are going to be squares. If someone is not affected by a trait in the pedigree, their shape will not be shaded in. If they are affected, they will be completely shaded in. Now, if someone is a carrier, which means they have one big letter, one little letter, they will be half shaded in to show they're a carrier. And then if they're marked out, they're deceased. They died. So, how to read a pedigree? So, looking at this pedigree, we have 3 generations. Now, let's start with this. These lines in between here, that shows reproduction or marriage. So, these two people are married, and this comes down and shows you their kids. So, these two got married, and this is bringing you down to their kids, just like it is here. So this big line is going to show the siblings. So we got a sister, a brother, and another sister. Now, normally when you're looking at this, you're going to number the generations. So we've got 1, 2, 3. And normally we use Roman numerals. Now, individuals within a generation are also going to be numbered. So, and you restart the numbering for each generation. So we've only got 2 people in generation 1. So we go 1, 2. We have more in generation 2. So we go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Same thing for generation 3. You recount. So let's do some practice questions. How many males are shown in this pedigree? So let's count the males. And remember that the males are squares. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. We have 8 males. So number 2, how many females in this pedigree have dimples? Now remember, females are circles, and if they have it, their shape is going to be shaded in. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We have 5 circles shaded in. So we have 5 females who have dimples. Now, how is individual third generation 3 related to individual third generation 5? So we're looking at how is this person related to this person? Well, they're not connected as siblings. So let's go up here. So this is their mom and dad. Now their dad is connected to their mom. Their mom and dad are siblings. So that would make 3 and 5 cousins. So how is individual 1 on generation 2 related to individual 2 in generation 1? All right, so we're comparing this person to this person. How are they related? Well, you follow the line. They're on a different line, so it's not their sibling. But looks like that is their father. So based off this information, what do you believe the genotype for individual from 1 is? Well, it's a circle and it's shaded in, so it's going to be capital D for dimples. We know that she's got dimples. Now, pedigrees will vary. Some are simple, and we're going to get into this a little bit later. But some are a little more complex. Now, using phenotypes to figure out possible genotypes, it's like solving a mystery. You can use clues and logic to narrow the possibilities for each person's genotype. So, for example, we can tell whether a gene is on an autosome or on a sex chromosome by looking at the number of males and females that are affected. If approximately the same number of males and females have the phenotype, the gene is most likely on an autosome. Now, if the phenotype is much more common in males, then the gene is most likely on the X chromosome. So part of it's kind of a guessing game. So with sex-linked genes, a trait is found on the sex chromosome. All right. So the X-linked recessive trait is uncommonly seen in female carriers who usually have at least some cells with an unaffected active X chromosome. However, female carriers can pass the trait to their sons, who will be affected, and to half their daughters. So affected males cannot pass the trait to their sons, but will pass it to all of their daughters. So the trait appears to skip a generation when female carriers only are present. So a female can be affected, which is homozygous, if an affected father marries a carrier. So let's talk about color blindness. Color blindness is a recessive trait, but is sex-linked. So we see generation 1, dad is not colorblind, but it looks like mom is a carrier of color blindness. So let's look at their children. They had 2 daughters and 2 sons. So one of the daughters is not a carrier or affected. This daughter is a carrier, but is not affected. But these 2 sons here are colorblind. So child 3 and 4, they didn't have any kids, so let's not worry about them. But these 2, they had 4 kids. Well, since dad is not colorblind, mom passed her carrier trait down, and only one of her children got it. But in this instance, dad has color blindness, so both of his daughters ended up being carriers of the trait. So now, in autosomal genes, a trait found on the gene of an autosome is going to be found on chromosomes 1 through 22. So a person who does not show the phenotype must have a homozygous recessive genotype. So they'll have little letters. So any other genotype, whether it's big D, little d, big D, big Y, big Y, so on and so forth, will produce that phenotype. So there are going to be 2 types of autosomal. There's autosomal dominant and autosomal recessive. So with autosomal recessive inheritance, all affected individuals will be homozygous recessive. So they'll have 2 little letters. Now, with dominant inheritance, all affected individuals will have at least 1 dominant allele, and they will be either homozygous dominant or heterozygous. So here, this guy is heterozygous for it. They're heterozygous for it and autosomal dominant. So, based off of that, we know that these are the possible genotypes that these children could share. All right? So, we know that this one has to have that big H, little h, based on Mendelian genetics. All right. So here are the ones we're given. This is an autosomal recessive. So all the ones that are shaded in have little h's. So let's say these are the possible combinations of this mother in generation 1. And that is the possible combination for generation 1 for that father. So based off of the gene that we're given and the genes that we guessed, these are are the genes that the children would have. Same thing over here. It's basically, a lot of it is kind of like you're solving the mystery. Like, okay, this person has it, but these people don't. So mom has to have some capital letters here somewhere, or else these children would all have the disorder. So a lot of this is you're playing detective to figure out the traits of these families. So let's try a simple one, because I know those had a lot going on. So, autosomal recessive trait is an attached earlobe. So, what is the genotype of person 1 on generation 1? Well, they're shaded in. So, their genotype is little e. So, they have those attached earlobes. Now, what is the genotype of individual over here? Well, man's not shaded in. So, I'm sorry, I don't know why this came out of order like that. I apologize. So, we know that the genotype is going to be biggie. Biggie, little e, I apologize. How do we know? Well, if you go down here, these are both shaded in. And the only way that they can be shaded in is that they get one little letter coming from number 2. So you know that dad had to be heterozygous for both of his daughters to get that trait. Now, an autosomal recessive is the most common inheritance pattern. So a disease or trait is rare in the family. Only a few members will be affected. Now, males and females are equally likely to inherit the disease or trait, and the trait or disease will often skip generations. Now, with autosomal dominant, the disease or trait is common in the family, and many will be affected in the family members. So males and females are equally likely to inherit the disease or trait, and the disease or trait will never skip a generation. So a child cannot inherit the trait if both parents are healthy. And with sex-linked, the disease or trait is rare in the family, and it is only affecting a few family members. So males are more affected than the females will be. So the disease or trait will often skip generations, and affected fathers do not pass the disease or trait to their sons. Now, this is just, some good information, a good chart to have in your notes. Remember, if you have any questions, be sure to reach out.